Let's talk about the World Bank President, David Malpass, who today delivered the traditional speech that precedes the annual meetings of the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. The World Bank chief spoke on the challenges facing development policy, the need for macroeconomic stability globally, private capital, as well as pathways out of fragility and extremism for Africa's Sahel region. Let's take a listen.
For the poorest countries, which require access to global markets to achieve sustained economic growth and poverty reduction. A renewed recognition of the essential value of international trade is needed. Its key principles are relatively straightforward. Trade that is based on comparative advantage and specialization is additive to innovation, efficiency, and growth. Government intervention should be targeted, time-bound, proportional, and non-discriminatory, and governments should recognize the growth benefits of harmonizing tariffs, customs procedures, and standards for safety and climate. Importantly, trade finance and access to sound money are essential to realizing the benefits of cross-border commerce. Here in Africa, there is huge potential for regional trade to reduce food insecurity and fertilizer shortages. For example, the continent produces approximately 30 million metric tons of fertilizer each year, twice as much as it consumes. And yet, approximately 90% of fertilizer consumed in sub-Saharan Africa is imported, mostly from outside the continent. This reflects a poorly functioning market system, inefficiencies in shipping and port costs, distribution chains and information availability, and a range of regional trade frictions. Each factor needs a concerted effort by African nations to fix the system. Better trade infrastructure and facilitation measures, such as harmonized rules, have an important role. And finally, the international community's mechanisms to finance the provision of global public goods must be strengthened. Just as trade practice should account for the impact of one country's policies on another country, many cross-border activities also have costs with consequences that stretch far into the future. Climate costs are being incurred worldwide without much regard to which countries are causing the damage. Fragility in one country or region can have massive costs in a neighbor or a distant country. And most recently, the pandemic showed that global costs of a pathogen, the unequal impact on the poor, and the importance of countries working together to share information and health practices. The investment needs related to global public goods are vast. We estimate that developing countries will need $2.4 trillion per year for the next 7 years to address the global challenges just of climate mitigation and adaptation, conflict, and pandemics. It's a huge number. Let me mention each in turn. Climate change is causing widespread costs, with the most vulnerable people and systems bearing the brunt. Adaptation is a top priority for developing countries, including more resilient agricultural practices and migration to safer locations. Developing countries also need to find low-carbon growth paths to provide reliable and affordable electricity and build resilient cities. The benefits of these efforts can extend beyond emissions reduction. For example, phasing out coal reduces local air pollution and makes for healthier communities. The same is true with regard to security. The number of civil conflicts almost doubled over the last decade. Conflict is tragic for the affected populations, which tend to be much poorer than the global average, and it has significant spillover effects to other countries. This is vividly experienced every day by the people in the Sahel region. We must also recognize the cost of pandemics and learn from the lessons of COVID-19. The pandemic fatally exposed the shortcomings of our global infrastructure for pandemic preparedness and response. Preventing pandemics requires investments in laboratory and diagnostics. It requires surveillance, clinical care, infection control, infrastructure and supply chains, human resources, and management systems linkages. New concessional resources will be particularly important for global public goods, including to facilitate energy transition, bolster security, and so on. Results-based mechanisms are an efficient way to provide concessionality in a non-fragmented manner. Against this background of overlapping crises, the World Bank Group doubled its financing for global public goods during my presidency, reaching over $100 billion reaching over $100 billion in the 3-year period of fiscal years 2020 through 2022, with over half of this amount in climate finance. We are continually exploring options to further increase our financial capacity. At the spring meetings upcoming, we're expecting to increase IBRD's financing. That's the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development. The IBRD's financing capacity by up to $50 billion over the next 10 years. IDA replenishments, the International Development Administration that the president mentioned, IDA replenishments have doubled over the past decade. They reached $93 billion in IDA 20. That's the most recent 3-year replenishment and the most ambitious in IDA's history. This was possible through financial innovations, including the issuance of well-received IDA bonds. However, there are still 700 million people living on less than $2 a day. They should be the world's highest priority. During the last 4 years, we have shown that financing for development can be quickly ramped up. Development needs have increased dramatically, and so should development finance to help countries such as Niger implement good development policies that support their citizens, boost economic growth, alleviate poverty, maintain peace, and respond to problems. With that, I want to thank you all very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Malpass, for the speech and for reminding us of the international context within which Sahel finds itself today and all the challenges ahead, but also the opportunities for improvement. Nous vous remercions, Monsieur le Président, pour ce discours de positionnement du groupe de la Banque mondiale.
Thank you.